too, so he really, really wants to beat mono blue.
He has 8 creatures with protection from blue in the main deck, and that certainly is an adaptation to the metagame here.
But that's also going to be good for him in this matchup because he's got 8 creatures that are good against Attention Sphere and Azorius Charm. And Shrout is going to get the beat started quickly here with an Experiment 1, while Duke is just going to do what blue-white does, which is play a few lands and pass.
Yeah, so I mean, this matchup, if you know your history a little bit, in that Pro Tour that Andrew Shrout top-aided, that was Pro Tour Dragon's Maze. It was a Pro Tour filled with Esper and Revelation decks that was, in the hands of Craig Wesco, taken down by a green-white aggro deck. So green-white, actually, this is a matchup that it has a lot of play in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of jockeying for position, and you know, it's kind of funny because the green-white deck is actually kind of the flash deck in this matchup. They've got Boon Satyr, they've got Advent of the Worm, they have cards like Selesnya Charm and Rootborn Defenses that the blue-white deck has to actually worry about. Right now, all Shrout has is a 1/1 Experiment 1, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some end-of-turn action here in the next turn.
Yeah, the players are a little slow out of the gates this game because of mulligans. Reid actually was on 5 cards. Andrew was on 6. Granted, Andrew was on the drop. Reid has a Divination. So both players are now kind of getting up to speed on their decks, but really the early game has just been lands, which you have to think favors Reid Duke.
I'm inclined to agree, as you're going to see an Elixir of Mortality after that Divination. And no Boon Satyr, no Selesnya Charm, no nothing there from Shrout. So I wonder what his hand is. He also has Skylasher, too, which is another flash spell. So he has nothing except for a boring old Experiment 1? I don't know if I buy it.
I mean, at this point, you have to think, or certainly suspicious of an Advent of the Worm when he's on 4 mana. I can't imagine that Andrew would have kept a 6-card hand with just Experiment 1 and nothing else. In fact, like where I read, I would probably be expecting a pair of Advent of the Worms to come out here.
Yeah. All right, so the Duke is going to play a Jace Architect of Thought. That's going to go down to 2. Here's a Detention Sphere. There's an Island, and that is a Mutavault. So let's see how Shrout decides to split these up.
Well, if he is on the double Advent hand, he has to be very scared of that Detention Sphere. He probably, you know, that card will be very good against, well, 2 things with the same name. And you see there, he does respect the Detention Sphere. He's putting it in its own pile.
So the big question here, does Duke need lands, or does he actually need spells at this point? He has resolved 2 divinations. He does have 4 lands in play. Obviously, this is a very mana-hungry deck playing 27 lands, and he is going to take 2 more lands, among them a Mutavault, so not just lands that do tap for mana, lands that do other things, and he's just going to pass the turn back. And there is, finally, an Advent of the Worm.
Right, so now Andrew has a real amount of power on the board, and he evolves Experiment 1, makes an Advent. What I really like about that play from Reid is he immediately -2'd the Jace as opposed to +1'ing it, basically expecting the Advent of the Worm. This attack would have been enough to exactly kill a Jace on 5, even if he had plussed it.
So we'll probably see Jace bite the dust here via Experiment 1 and then Advent of the Worm, take a chunk out of Reid's life total. But again, I'm really interested to see what Shrout's got in his hand. And one thing I like about the Selesnya deck, again, is that it just gets to play as the flash deck in this matchup. Reid doesn't really know what end-of-turn threat's going to come because there are so many things that do have flash. He just knows that something's going to come and he needs to try to play around the bevy of things that Shrout can do accordingly. One thing that Shrout doesn't actually have in his main deck that Wesco had in his Pro Tour deck was Rootborn Defenses. You're not going to find any of those in his main deck, but it's a different format, of course.
Well, what I like about Shrout is Shrout's deck, because he doesn't necessarily need the Rootborn Defenses, because if you count creatures with haste and flash, you know, then Shrout has a full 20 creatures in his main deck here that can attack Reid. He has Selesnya Charms, Skylashers, Mist Cutters, Advents, and Boon Satyrs.
So Detention Sphere is going to take care of that Worm token, as you had predicted. So let's see what Shrout wants to do on his end step here, because it feels like he has something.
Yeah. Well, remember, Shrout didn't give him the Detention Sphere. That was a second one in Reid's hand. True. And I was expecting the second Advent. Shrout does not seem to have one. He does have a Voice of Resurgence here.
I feel like he just has a lot of lands. This is probably a Mist Cutter Hydra, right?
I would think it is.
And so that's going to be a Hydra for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a 5-power creature, and it will evolve Experiment 1. Not sure if Reid saw this coming. He does have a Last Breath at the ready.
Yeah, I think he has to make that play here. So that will mitigate some of this damage. Reid is not playing any Celestial Flares in the deck, so leaving the Mist Cutter alone doesn't really help him take care of it. He's pretty much on the Elspeth or Supreme Verdict plan to get that guy off the table.
Now Elspeth, I assume, is he on the one? He's on the 1 Elspeth, 1 Elixir version.
He's on 1 Elspeth, 1 Elixir. Yep. I believe he's on the same 75 that Huey Jensen's on for this tournament.
Not much of a surprise there. EC Duke is going to play a Plains. Oh, no, does he have the Elspeth?
And
he
there it
does.
is.
Wow. So the 1 Elspeth in the deck is going to create 3 soldier tokens, where he could have minus the Elspeth.
Well, he could have minus it, but remember, Shroud's deck does have a fair amount of haste in it. You'd hate to lose the Elspeth to another Mist Cutter.
Now, this is kind of interesting, too, right? Because by doing it this way for Duke, he kind of opens himself up to a Selesnya Charm trample.
Right.
But the other way, he just kills the Mistcutter, but then he's, worried about a different set of threats. So now Mistcutter is going to be coming in to the red zone predictably. And now how does Reid want to block? Does he want to put 3 guys in front of him? Does he want to put 1 in front of it?
3 guys plays around 1 Selesnya Charm. Reid actually can't play around 2 Selesnya Charms, which is what I believe Shrout has. So my guess is that he'll play around the first one.
Okay.
So in order to do that, what he needs to do, so you have to assume it's a 7/7 trample. You want to put 3 toughness in front of it so it can't kill a 5. So I think a triple block is probably the play here.
Very interesting to see him not minus the Elspeth to take care of the Mistcutter. Is he going to single block? Oh, no.
He's not going to play around any of the Selesnya Charms, and that's certainly going to get
1 and 2 copies of Selesnya Charm. +2/+2. Make that +4/+4 and trample.
Well, now the question is, did the Mistcutter Hydra go at Elspeth or at Reid? I think that Hydra was at Reid.
That Hydra was at Reid, and that is going to do it for that game. So Andrew Shrout does win game 1 over Reid Duke. Green-white aggro up a game over blue-white control. Did not expect to see green-white aggro coming into this tournament. Certainly not this build.
No, I mean, this build is certainly, you could say, has adapted to the metagame.
Yeah.
I think that last play was very interesting. I had assumed that the Mistcutter Hydra was going at Elspeth. That is an aggressive line he took there by swinging it at Reid, and it really paid dividends there.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like that play, right? Where do you think that Reid is going to play around double Selesnya Charm in that situation?
Well, clearly he doesn't. If Reid does put all 3 creatures in front of the Mistcutter, then Andrew can't actually make his swing lethal that turn. So the Elspeth will be able to take care of his Hydra, and Andrew actually could be in a pretty difficult spot. But it does have the upside that unless Reid makes the all-in block, he's just dead on the board.
Yeah. So we're going to take a look at the sideboards here as both players do shuffle up. You see Shrout taking a look. Duke will be doing the same shortly. You've got Reid's in front of you. He'll be on the play this game. Doesn't want to mulligan to 5, obviously, but what can he do here?
Well, Reid's game plan here is going to be nothing too surprising. He has another pair of Last Breaths, which will come in the matchup. They're good against Experiment ones. They're excellent against Voice of Resurgences. He doesn't yet know about the Skylashers, but if he learns about them, he'll be happy to have more Last Breaths too. So those are for the matchup. Outside of that, he may also bring in a Glare of Heresy, though there aren't too many white creatures for him to target with it. He doesn't have the Celestial Flares in the sideboard, so he has cut back a little bit on the amount of small creature hate that you'd expect out of a blue-white deck.
We'll take a look over here at Shroud's sideboard. He's got 4 copies on Unflinching Courage, a card that is really underplayed right now, but that's because green-white just isn't seeing a lot of play. So if there's a reason to play green-white, that is certainly one of the cards, but obviously not going to come in for this matchup. 3 copies of Witchstalker, the 3-mana, 3/3 hexproof creature. Might not be so bad in this particular matchup. 3 Glare of Heresy. Of course, Duke has copies of Detention Sphere in his deck. He also has that lone Elspeth, so do you want to board in some number of those? I think there's potential of that. 3 copies of Last Breath, an additional Boon Satyr, and a Scavenging Ooze. So the options I like here, I think the Boon Satyr is an easy one to want to bring in.
Absolutely.
Glare of Heresy and Witchstalker, I'm not quite sure. Maybe in some numbers?
Yeah, so my guess is that the Witchstalker's for the mono-black matchup.
Okay.
It can be good against blue-white because blue-white can't target it, but then again, blue-white does still have tools to deal with it. It does still have Supreme Verdict. It could have Celestial Flare, though it doesn't right now. I think we'll see Shrout bring in some number of those nonetheless, but as far as like the power-toughness ratio to mana cost, Witchstalker is a little underwhelming. Glare of Heresy, out of some decks, can be great against our Detention Sphere because Shrout has a lot of creature tokens or cards like, creature tokens. Hitting a sphere with a Glare of Heresy does not always get the creature back, so boarding in cards like that in this matchup can be problematic for Andrew. If he gets into the game of trying to hit Reid's Detention Spheres, that's really not the game plan he wants to be playing. He'd rather just play another threat.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one too. It's where I understand why you would want to board Glare in, but I kind of feel like it's a situation where, again, as you mentioned, there's a lot of creature tokens, so Detention Sphere is going to take care of the creature a high percentage of the time period, and also, there will be times I think where you draw Glare of Heresy and it might just end up being pretty dead and not do exactly what you want to do, and you certainly don't want to draw multiples. I feel like. So maybe he boards in one. He's certainly got cards to board out in the matchup. He's got 4 copies of Vanisher Priest, and he has the Last Breath. So that's 5 cards to sideboard out very easily in the matchup. You can argue the Scavenging Ooze is the 6th one to board out, and then we could see the 3 Witchstalkers, the Boon Satyr, and then some copies of Glare of Heresy come in.
Yeah, I think because he has cards like Vanisher Priest that are so low impact in the matchup, Witchstalker is pretty much, you can expect to see all of the Witchstalkers included. He just wants to continue to make more creatures, basically force Reid to have the right removal at the right time.
Shrout is going to go down to 6. The Duke looks pretty happy as we make our way through our standard invitational. Oh, excuse me, our standard portion of the invitational. Cedric Phillips, Matthias Hunt at SCG Live, hashtag SCGINVI for your tweets over the course of the day. Today will be a busy one. We've got 4 rounds of Standard, then 4 rounds of Legacy. We'll have our top 8 decided for tomorrow morning, and then we'll be cutting into our Standard Open, in which we expect a very large attendance here in Las Vegas. And we'll do our quarterfinal round this evening to wrap things up for that tournament. And then tomorrow, we'll do it all again. But as Ruben and Glenn told you guys at the top of the day, a lot of fun announcements were announced yesterday with our Players' Championship, with our new token series, all the things that are happening here for the year 2014 of Star City Games organized play. It's a big year next year, and it's a fun way to conclude this year here with the Invitational.
Yeah, the announcements, I think, have been pretty exciting, especially I'm really excited about the organized play changes for next year.
Me too.
Right now, we're seeing, our end of the year invitational. It's a great event to build up to, but where this next year, there would be another event following this, which would be even bigger.
Yes, it'll be absolutely huge, as the Azorius Guildgate is going to start the show for Reid. You've got a Selesnya Guildgate on Shrout's side. Both of those guys are waiting for temples. They need temples in their deck. So let's see if Shrout gets off to a decent start this game. All right, so he's got 2 mana, and that's a Scavenging Ooze. So I was wondering if he was going to leave that in. Last Breath is going to take care of that. Similarly, if that had been a Voice of Resurgence, it would have died as well. So I think Fleece Mainline was the card that Shrout was looking for, but he only has 2 of those in his deck.
Yeah, Scavenging Ooze is not particularly great in this matchup. I think Shrout still plays them because they're just 2-drops that are fine to cast. He only has so many things that he can board out, but a little underwhelming.
There is the Witchstalker. You see Duke taking a look. We'll bring it up for you guys here at home. Doesn't see a ton of play.
Yeah, originally it was hyped as the new card in Bant Hexproof, which I think a lot of people were looking for back when that was the deck last season. It really didn't materialize that way. But now we're seeing it, especially these all removal spell decks showing up. Maybe it's finding a home in Standard again.
Yeah, I mean, this actually seems like a pretty good tool in this matchup. And as you mentioned, against Mono Black, where, the Hexproof is a big deal. The +1/+1 counter is not going to come up a ton, but just the fact that it's a difficult creature to kill makes it a good sideboard card.
Absolutely. So it's going to get some points of damage here. Gets its first attack in on Reid.
Again, and it's nice because Temple Garden's going to come in untapped here, and now Shrout gets to play this game again. I've got a threat. It's one that you can't answer efficiently, and now I can do everything I need to do on the end of turn and then make you tap out on your own turn, and maybe he can set up what he set up last game, which is just by retapping on his own turn, a big hit with a Mistcutter Hydra.
Yeah, well, he makes, a pretty telltale play here. He shocks for his 4th land and passes the turn. I don't think there's really any confusion that he's going to be playing Advent of the Worm.
Yeah, we saw a lot of this back in May at Pro Tour Dragon's Maze, of course, with Craig Wesco and everybody else who was playing green-white at that tournament, as here is a Jace that's going to go down immediately again, going to turn over a Blind Obedience, a Supreme Verdict, and a Mutavault. Blind Obedience coming in.
Yeah, so Blind Obedience should be pretty good against the Mistcutter Hydras from Andrew's deck. On top of that, it gives Reid a little bit of life gain, which certainly can't hurt in this matchup. But I think out of these 3 cards, Supreme Verdict really is the card here.
Yeah, I think it is the best one, but Reid is going to opt for the enchantment and the Mutavault. Maybe he needs the land. He does have a full hand. There is your Mutavault. And let's see what Shrout's going to play on the end step. I'm not sure if Duke has a discard or not right now.
It looks like Reid is at 8 cards. He's going to have to discard 1. Remember, Shrout actually does have to play it. If he has Advent, he has to play it before Reid discards.
Is it a Skylasher? It is a Skylasher, okay. And it's second
another
Skylasher.
So there's a second thing it could have been. It wasn't actually the Advent. It was double Skylasher.
That's interesting because Duke didn't take the Verdict here. Does he have another one in his hand? That's the big question. As Shrout has to decide how he wants to go about attacking now.
Yeah, Shrout does have a Mistcutter Hydra in hand. It looks like he's going to not play it right now. I think he's still pretty worried about the Supreme Verdict.
I wouldn't, and at this point, I wouldn't make a move either if I was Shrout. I think his board is good enough where, again, he doesn't have to add anything to it. Duke has to actually take care of what he's got. He does have a Supreme Verdict to do just that. So a 3-for-1 there for Reid. We'll see if Shrout has something in the end step. He does. It's a Boon Satyr.
Right, and isn't this just what I think the green-white deck is adapted to? I mean, everything either has haste or flash. Each creature, in some ways, functions as a burn spell. Shrout was pretty sure that those Skylashers were only going to get 1 hit in, but yeah, well, he was just fine playing them.
Yeah. And I actually really like how this green-white deck plays, just because it does play on the end step of the opponent the entire time. There is an Experiment 1. There is a Witch Stalker going to evolve there. And I think it's safe to play out the threats like this because he's already seen one verdict resolve, and he put one on the bottom. So does Reid have the third one?
Right, and he's really just challenging Reid to have the verdict. And I like that. One of the dominant strategies you can do against blue-white control is you can't actually beat them when they draw all the right things at the right time. You have to challenge them just to have it.
And Shrout did take the challenge there. There's the Mistcutter Hydra. It's going to come into play tapped. Normally it's coming to play tapped and attacking, but not this time due to Blind Obedience.
Yeah, Blind Obedience is doing a ton of work here. And as that's Shrout's last card, all Reid has to do is answer that final Mistcutter. Granted, what Shrout was able to set up is he was able to get a verdict on the bottom of Reid's deck and 2 verdicts in the yard, and none of them hit Mistcutter Hydra.
Yep. So there's only one left here. Now, what are the outs here that Reid does have? Because you mentioned Celestial Flare when we were sideboarding, but he doesn't have those in his deck list this weekend.
Right, it really is just the 4th Supreme Verdict and the Elspeth as far as getting rid of the Mistcutter Hydra. What he can do is just Revelation his way past the Mistcutter Hydra, and I think that's the line we're going to see him take. He can start extorting with Blind Obedience, and he can just keep a large enough stream of life gain going that he doesn't really have to answer the Hydra for a while.
You see a Detention Sphere among the cards that were drawn there for Reid, but that's not going to be any good. So you might see Mutavault on chump blocking duty here sooner rather than later.
Yep, Reid plays 3 Mutavaults, so he could double block a Mistcutter. That's another possible removal spell. Obviously, getting rid of 2 lands is not a great situation from a control deck, but it's an option that Reid has.
And he could do exactly what you mentioned, of course, which is just chain together a couple Revelations, and there is another one. So this one's going to be for 5. Duke is going to move up to 8, but more importantly, he's going to get himself 5 more cards.
Well, he wants to chain together Revelations, and he'd really like to actually hit the one of Elixir of Immortality.
Yeah.
There's 2 Supreme Verdicts in his yard and 1 Supreme Verdict on the bottom of the deck. It would be great for Reid if he can shuffle them back in to get them spaced out through his deck again.
So he's got a bevy of cards in his hand. Don't know how relevant all those options are. You're seeing a Azorius Charm. We know he has a Detention Sphere, so he's got some cards that do things, just nothing that does great stuff against Mistcutter Hydra. You mentioned Elixir. That's one of the cards that he's really looking for, and you can see that he's really starting to go to work here in his head about how he wants to craft a game plan. All he's got to worry about is this one Mistcutter Hydra, because the next one's going to come into play tapped, and he can deal with it accordingly. So he's going to start with a Temple of Deceit. Excuse me. He's going to scry here.
Well, all the cards Reid has that answer 1 Mistcutter Hydra answer 2 Mistcutter Hydras. So yeah, he really isn't worried about the second one. He's just, he has to consider he's taking 4 every turn. So he needs to either chump block, he needs to Supreme Verdict, or Sphinx's Revelation, or here we have Elixir of Immortality. And with the Extort is actually a 6-point life gain.
Extort, that's not really a mechanic you see much in Constructed. It's pretty much only on Blind Obedience. Is that the only real Extort card that sees a lot of play?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I think there was a time where people talked about playing Thrall Parasite. That was only in block, though, and didn't even materialize there. Blind Obedience has really been the only one that uses it.
Well, here is an Elvish Mystic after Shrout does attack for 4, and Shrout is just living off the top of his deck, which is a very uncomfortable feeling when you're playing against a blue-white player of Reid Duke's caliber. He's going to start by cycling a Azorius Charm, draw a Mystery card. And the interesting thing here is when exactly is Duke going to cash in that Elixir? Because we know what's going to happen at some point.
Well, right now, he got a free Extort off that Azorius Charm. He can't get an Extort off the second one because Mutavault is colorless. But I think he wants to try to hit his outs first before he shuffles up and goes for them a second time.
Again, 1 verdict that we know about. Of course, there's 1 on the bottom of Reid's deck. We're not sure where the other one is hiding out. I think it might be being cast
I think
right
5,
now.
right? Yeah, 5 right there looks like a verdict with Extort.
So bye-bye Mistcutter, bye-bye Elvish Mystic, and bye-bye good board position there for Andrew Shrout. Now Duke is starting to take over control of this game.
Yeah, well, I mean, Shrout's left with no hand. Reid has the Elixir going. Thanks to Blind Obedience, he doesn't really have to worry about getting fleece-mained. Right now, Shrout does have yet another decent play. He has on 7 mana fleece-main line, so that's something that Reid has to deal with.
I wonder if Duke lives in counterspells in this matchup.
I mean,
fleece-main's going to resolve. It's going to come into play tapped.
Now that there aren't counterspells, this fleece-main's not getting answered by Reid's deck. He didn't, like I said, he doesn't play the Celestial Flares, so I don't believe he even has a way to get this off the board once it's been monstrositied. Once again, that doesn't mean Reid can't win. The Elixir deck really does have a late game of just casting Sphinx's Revelation every turn. And the best part is I literally do mean every turn.
Now this is going to be kind of neat actually, because Fleecemane Lion again, when this card was released, and everyone, this was the talk of the town. Now Green White's getting way too good. Hasn't really made its mark on the format. You see Shrout's going to activate the monstrosity on Fleecemane Lion while Duke is shuffling up with his elixir. But right now in this situation, Duke is at 12, and this could be a problematic card for him right now.
Yeah, he needs to find the Elspeth so that he can just make chump blockers for it forever. Like I said, he can't actually get it off the board, but he does have powerful enough plays that he can ignore it, at least as long as there's only one. If there starts becoming 2 or 3 of them, then that will become a problem.
Uh-oh, we've got 5 mana here, maybe 6. So,
and this is a spicy one of, out of Reid's board. This is Lavinia of the 10th, so we'll get that one up here.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Shrout, yeah. I want to know what this does too.
Well, it's pro-red. That part doesn't matter. I believe when it comes into play, it detains a bunch of things. Yeah. I believe it detains all small converted mana cost cards. So it's going to actually detain the Fleecemane Lion here for a turn.
So we'll have that Lavinia of the 10th come up on the screen for you guys shortly so we can see exactly what that does. That's the guild champion from Azorius.
Right, so there's a whole cycle of legendary rares from Dragon's Maze for each guild, and Lavinia is the rare for Azorius.
Alright, so let's see what's going to happen here. Mutavault's looking tough. Getting into the red zone now will do.
Yeah, Reid's actually getting a little aggressive here. We see
a Needle.
Needle with Extort.
The Extort with Blind Obedience is kind of interesting. Just like how it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it ends up being a really big deal over the course of the game.
And I think it's interesting that Reid has brought in the Needles. If you look at Andrew Shrout's deck, obviously naming Fleecemane Lion would be could be a decent play, but what else does he name with the Needle in the matchup?
I'm taking a look right now. I mean, Scavenging Ooze is a rather mediocre name.
Yeah, like Experiment 1 is a mediocre card to name.
I guess my assumption is that Reid probably believes that he has Mutavault somewhere out through his deck. And Mutavault is, of course, good against blue-white.
Sure.
Since, it's just a harder remove threat. But green-white has such poor mana that they really can't afford to play Mutavault. So I can't imagine Shrout's deck having Mutavault in it. We have the deck list here. It does not have it. So I'm interested to see what he named with Needle. It's now he's going to play Detention Sphere.
Yeah, so he's going to cast a Detention Sphere, and looks like he's extorting with it. Now, Sphere does actually have, I believe Sphere is it a May or does he have to name something? Okay, so you can just cast it for an extort, which is what Reid's doing. And he's set to draw so many cards.
Glare Fairs. Okay, so
yeah, he's
I see what we're doing. We're extorting.
Yeah. We're casting and killing our own things just to extort.
Now he's going to pass the turn back and try to get this game over with here. It's 8-1. It takes one more spell for Duke to get the job done.
He has 2 attackers, so that should be good enough, especially because Blind Obedience means that Shrout can't play a blocker of his own.
Yeah. So Shrout is going to pick up his permanence, and Reid Duke is going to win game number 2. I'd like to see a third and final game of this matchup. I think it's really, really interesting. I like Shrout's deck a lot, actually.
Well, Shrout's deck looks very good in this matchup. I like that Reid has gone back to the Blind Obedience plan. That's something we really haven't seen for a long time. I think when Gatecrash first came out for Pro Tour Montreal, there was a lot of players who in their Esper decks were trying to play the interaction of 4 Lingering Souls and then a couple Blind Obediences, and actually, one like Extort plus swing with Spirit tokens your way all the way from 20 to 0 on your opponent. Without Lingering Souls, you can't really extort someone from 20 to 0. You have to play a real win con.
Yep.
Or in Reid's case, play no win cons at all.
You see both players are going to go back to the sideboards here. I wonder if they're changing anything in particular. Now, of course, Shrout's got a better idea of what Reid's sideboard options do look like. Throughout the course of that game, the one thing, again, that you did mention, Celestial Flare, Shrout has not seen one yet. He's not going to see one. But a lot of blue-white decks do have access, typically, to in between 2 to 3 of that card. So I don't know if he's going to sideboard maybe with that in mind or not. Again, we saw Scavenging Ooze in the last game that didn't really do anything because of a Last Breath. So maybe he boards that out for another option here, does Shrout. But I think this is a matchup where he came into the tournament knowing that he needed to beat this deck, and I think he has the ability to beat this deck just with how his deck is crafted. And that's the thing I really, really like about it, is that I think he came in one to try to beat what people perceive to be the best deck in the format in blue-white control.
Yeah, and so I like how you put that when you said at this tournament, especially at the Invitational, everybody came in with a plan for this blue-white control deck. When a deck like this wins an event so close to the Invitational, you can count on it being played first of all because it was it did so well in the hands of Huey Jensen. Okay,
Yeah.
one of the top players initially. Also, this is the style of deck that is really going to be appealing to a lot of the top players here. So yeah, I mean green-white aggro, something you normally don't want to run green-white creatures into a field of Wrath of Gods and Supreme Verdicts. That has traditionally been a difficult spot for green-white to be in. But then Andrew Shrout goes ahead and goes with that game plan, but he does it in such an interesting way to try to give himself that extra edge.
Yeah, it seems like his deck is kind of built to try to have a good matchup against the Supreme Verdict decks and then Mono Blue Devotion, and then he could probably have some game against maybe a Red White Devotion or some of the Nykthos decks out there, potentially Mono Black as well. It's interesting just because the green white cards are so powerful, but they just haven't really had a home right now.
Yeah, so I want to look back at the one of Lavinia of the 10th and Reid's sideboard. So, okay, we're going to get the actual Oracle on the card. It's pro-red. When it enters the battlefield, you detain each non-land permanent your opponent's control with converted mana cost 4 or less. So it's not actually targeted, which is why I was able to hit the Fleecemane Lion there. I'm interested as to where that card fits in the deck. It'll buy him a turn pretty much every time he casts it, but the difficulty is that, you have to make sure that the 4/4 is still relevant.
I like this card just because I like the card. Like,
the card's excellent.
It's a sweet card. I don't know exactly where it fits into the deck and why there's one of them in the sideboard, but I'm not Reid Duke, I'm not Huey Jensen, I'm not Owen Turtenwald.
It's possible that the protection from red is very relevant. It's an infinite blocker against a large red creature. Like, there's an Ember Swallower or something.
Sure. Last Breath is going to take care of a Voice of Resurgence.
Yeah.
Voice, probably the most expensive mythic to not be seeing any consistent play out there.
Voice really took a hit with Theros, I would say.
Yeah.
And Voice was traditionally the gold standard in this matchup. But now Reid, look at this. Glare of Heresy, Last Breath. Doesn't even... It's just not something that the Revelation decks are scared of anymore.
Yeah. So many answers. So many answers to the card. I mean, Last Breath is kind of the new hotness that everyone's playing now from blue-white, since it's such an efficient rules when you don't care about the life gain. Hallowed Fountain going to come into play untapped here for Duke. Looks like he's going to resolve a Divination. So 2 cards coming for the former Invitational Champion. Shrout's going to play Selesnya Charm on the end step. So a 2/2, so he does have some aggression here. But the one thing to keep in mind here, Matthias, you take a look at the mana base for Shrout right now. 2 plains, 1 forest. Does not have that extra green source. So if he does have a Boon Satyr or an Advent of the Worm hanging out, you can't cast him.
Yeah, at least right now, Reid doesn't have too much to be worried about.
You see, Shrout does have a Boon Satyr in his hand. He does have a Glare of Heresy, a Fleecemane Lion as well. There is the line going to pass the turn back, but does not have a second green source. Does Shrout?
Yeah, he has a Mistcutter Hydra as well. But he's a little choked on mana. Because Reid was on the play and has cast a Divination, Shrout does not have too many turns to recover from that stumble. He'd really like to get a Monstrosity counter on that Fleecemane Lion. But because she's short on lands, Reid is very likely not going to let that happen.
Last Breath is going to take down that token, so this feels like Duke doesn't have a Supreme Bird. It doesn't mean that's true, it's just what it feels like, is Shrout does roll off a Temple Garden for the turn. So now all systems are a go, and he's only 1 land away from that Fleecemane Lion counter.
Yeah, I think you are completely right that he doesn't have the Supreme Verdict. He probably doesn't even have the Detention Sphere, as in that situation we likely would have seen a Detention Sphere on Fleecemane Lion. It's possible that Reid has, actually, if he has a Verdict, if he had Last Breath, Azorius Charm, this line has the potential to be more devastating to Shrout.
That's true.
For example, in Shrout's position, I think he strategically is locked into swinging with this Fleecemane Lion, but Azorius Charm is so good against him right now.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question, right? Where if he doesn't attack, and now here comes a Mistcutter Hydra for 3, if he doesn't attack with Fleecemane Lion, are you happy with Reid cycling the Azorius Charm, or would you rather have him place that Fleecemane Lion on top of your deck so he doesn't draw a card?
Yeah, if he's not attacking with Fleecemane Lion, what is he doing here, right? So if Reid had a Verdict, he might have taken the extra damage there.
Yeah. But I don't think he has a Verdict. So Mistcutter Hydra is going to come across for 3. Here's a Divination, so 2 more cards coming for the Duke. Draws an island, and I think a plains among those cards. So he's got a lot of cards in his hand, which is going to be the normal case for blue-white. He just has to have his answers line up to Shrout's questions.
Yeah, he has a 3rd Last Breath in hand. I think one of the things Reid has to be very scared of is if Andrew can get a Monstrosity counter on that Fleecemane Lion, he even has a Boon Satyr in hand for it. He can make this creature very lethal.
Top card's going to go to the bottom there for Reid. Temple of Silence is going to put it there. And is this going to be the Elixir? It is.
Be. And what I've been impressed with Elixir is not just how it's been late game, its late game potential in these decks, but how relevant the gaining 5 life has been.
Super relevant.
I mean, one of the complaints I had about Elixir when it first came out as a card was that it was White Sun's Passage, which is a 2-mana gain 5 life.
Sure.
And the worst part is that's a card you don't want to play, and you had to draw multiple White Sun's Passages because every time you'd shuffle it, you just get another one. But it actually seems like 2-mana gain 5 in a land where creatures are attacking for 4s and 5s isn't even that bad.
Boonsater on the end step here from Shrout, so not Advent of the Worm, but still a large creature nonetheless. So Shrout is going to untap and draw. You see Duke there at 10, a virtual 15. Going to come into the red zone. Will Shrout attacking for 7. Duke is going to go down to, looks like 3.
Yeah, Shrout is still playing his cards like burn spells, which I really like here. You know, he could have saved the Boonsater to try to put it on a Fleece main line, but like I said, he's just pushing damage with his cards. Every card's a burn spell. It feels a lot like the red-black aggro decks of about a year ago, the ones that every creature had haste.
Yeah, I do remember that deck.
Yeah,
so
they were
Suicide Slide. They were Satanic Slide.
Yeah, it was the Falcon Wrath, Aristocrat, Thundermaw, Hellkite. It was just every single thing had haste, and it really does feel like that on Reid's side of the board.
So Duke is at 6. He's got a lot of cards in his hand since he just resolved a Revelation for 3. At a virtual 11 because of the Elixir, but he is underneath some substantial pressure. And Shrout, again, he just passed the turn back with 4 mana available. That means so many things in green-white. Again, Celestia Charm, Skylasher, Boonsater, Advent of the Worm, Rootborn Defenses, even though we know he doesn't have that in his deck list. But that's so common for a green-white deck that Duke actually has to give that some real thought of, what if he has this? Could I possibly beat that if he has it right now?
Well, and that's what Shrout's deck's done really well. He is overloaded. This deck is overloading the Reid's Supreme Verdicts. You know, he needs them to get rid of the Mistcutter Hydras. He needs them. Anytime Shrout plays 2 creatures, Reid basically needs a Supreme Verdict. And now with, you know, there's a threat of Rootborn Defense. Because Reid only has 4 verdicts, he probably just can't respect Rootborn Defenses as a card even.
Now this is a really interesting interaction. Jace comes into play, it's going to tick up. And so normally Last Breath wouldn't be able to kill that Mistcutter Hydra because it'll get -1/-0 when it attacks. Last Breath can actually take care of it, and Duke has a Last Breath in his hand right now.
So that line is scary for him. It means he's dead to Celestia Charm or land Boonsater.
Yes.
But you're right. I think he's going to go for that.
I think that might be what he's trying to set up. You see, Shrout is like, okay, you've got 2 mana open. You've got a Jace that ticked up. What do I have to worry about? Do I have an end-of-turn threat to play? I think he's got a Boonsater in his hand.
Yeah, I do believe he has a Boonsater. I don't think he has land number 5.
Okay. I think you just drop down the Boonsater here. But the problem with that is that the Elixir is going to put him high enough, right, where he'll go up to 11 and the attack will be for 3, 6, 7, 8. So it won't be a lethal attack.
Right.
So let's see what Shrout draws this turn. And right now his hand, he has a Glare of Heresy, he's got a Fleece main line, he's got another mystery card or 2 over there.
So I'm not sure if Shrout wants to take the time to kill the Jace. I think he does because this is locking Reid into just cracking Elixir.
Okay.
And you don't want a Jace activation. Remember, Reid just needs Supreme Verdict. And
really bad.
The problem is if Reid does find Supreme Verdict, it's probably his game. Like, Shroud's hand has very little action beyond that. I think he has a Glare of Heresy and a Fleece main line.
Yeah, that's and a mystery card right now.
Yeah, none of those are going to be good if Reid resolves a Revelation. Or, sorry, not a Revelation, but a Verdict.
Yeah. So Jace is going to bite the dust here. And I believe Duke is going to go down to 3 after this attack. So he's at 3, Shrout's at 26. But Shrout's life total obviously doesn't matter very much.
After Shrout made that attack, I am surprised that Reid didn't do the Last Breath play.
Me too. Me too. And you know a player of Reid Duke's caliber.
He saw it.
He's not going to miss that.
I'm aware. You know, he's like, maybe you didn't catch it. It's like, no. Each player has their strength here, and that's one. Yeah, that's a strength that, you know, Reid's not going to miss that play.
So he's going to do it now, after Jace dies. And I guess the thought process there is maybe he just doesn't want to get blown up by Celestia Charm, since Shrout's not ever tapping into his mana on turn. That could be the thinking, as here comes the Mutavault, and he passed the turn back.
2 Celestia Charms would certainly kill him. There is the potential that if he Last Breath there, he could have saved his Jace.
All right, attack for lethal, says Shrout. Reid says, how about a Mutavault?
Yeah, Mutavault, really, really strong right here.
And now Elixir, Suffle in. So he's going to go up to 8.
Up to 8.
Interesting thing here. Oh, well, never mind. I take that back. I was going to say, should he shuffle in after Mutavault dies, but then he would be dead. So
Then he'd be dead.
I take
so
it
yes.
back. I
yes,
take it
so
back.
my answer would be no.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
the
think
answer would
he
be no.
should.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. So Duke is at 8, and he's going to go down to 4, assuming that everything goes accordingly here.
Yes, that Boon Stater still is lethal next turn. Reid will need something to deal with it. Remember, he's just one revelation from probably getting this game now. His life total is decently low, and Shroud's creatures all are flash, haste.
Big.
They're all really scary for the control deck. That was one of the things I think a lot of teams had found when this format first started at the Pro Tour, was that the actual best way to attack the control decks was with green, because green has such diversity of threats right now. You have to deal with sometimes planeswalkers and hexproofers and flash creatures, and pro-blue creatures and haste creatures, and there's enough of it that while blue-white can deal with all of them, it's hard-pressed to deal with all of them in a relevant fashion, doing it on time before it dies.
Another last breath there from Duke is going to take care of Experiment 1. You see Shrout finally extending his board a little bit, so he will get cleaned up pretty good here by a Supreme Verdict, but Duke does not have it still. Shrout's going to untap, take a draw step. Does he have a 5th land for that Fleece Mane line? It's an Experiment 1 off of the top. You see 2 copies of Glare Heresy, and here's an attack, and that is going to do it! Andrew Shrout does defeat Reid Duke in 3 very close games. Green-white aggro, a deck pretty far off the map, takes down blue-white control, arguably the best deck in the format.
Reid's Supreme Verdicts were so overloaded that game. It seemed just every turn of the game, in all the games, we were just thinking, boy, Reid needs